Hello and welcome back to the Library of Ruina Ranked Abnormality Edition. In this video, we'll be covering all of Gebura's abnormalities. While the red mist is certainly strong, do our abnormality pages contribute to that, or is it just a Cali show? Let's find out. Starting off in Tier 1, our F tier page is Fear of Water. This page gives a buff to a single ally that makes them inflict 1 bleed next scene on hit, as well as getting 1 blood on hit, excluding mass attacks. Blood is a status that gives various effects based on the amount of blood. At 0 blood, the user loses between 4 and 8 stagger resist. If they have more than 1 blood, their offensive dice deal 3 to 7 bonus damage at the cost of making the user lose 2 to 7 HP. And at 15 or more blood, they gain 2 strength, but lose all blood at the start of the next scene, and 3 stacks of blood are lost at the end of each scene. I'm not a fan of this page. You end up losing a ton of HP in exchange for damage most of the time, and then you'll occasionally get some strength. All of Nosferatu's pages synergize with each other, but I think this one's not worth taking at all. In D tier, we have Prey. This page gives a buff to a single ally that marks the first enemy they attack and makes them deal 2 to 6 bonus damage when attacking the marked enemy. This page is like a lot of other marked pages. Against bosses it's alright, but nothing special since it only affects 1 librarian and 1 enemy, and against multi-act fights it's pretty bad. At the very least, this one doesn't cost you HP to use, so it escapes F tier. Moving on to Tier C, we have the Role of the Wolf. This page gives a buff to a single librarian that increases their counter dice power by 1 to 2 and makes their counter dice inflict 2 fragile and clashed wind up to 3 times per scene. This page got destroyed by the counter die nerf, but it's still somewhat relevant. Usually counter dice are somewhat rare, but the red mists page has one innately, so that's helpful. The buffs are quite strong, but the narrowness holds it back somewhat, as does the inconsistent nature of counter dice rarely clashing into the page you want to clash into most. Our B tier page is Vengeance. This page gives a buff to a single ally that gives them 1 strength per 5 damage taken last scene with a max of 2. Taking 10 damage is pretty easy to do if you want, and you can trigger it even easier if you run Wrath of Torment. The main issue I have with Vengeance is that needing to take damage to get your power boost can be painful over multiple turns, since it forces you to either tank pages or make poor clashes with your utility pages, and 10 damage is like 10% of your average librarian's HP, so even with sustain it can add up. On a different floor, this could easily be the S tier page, but Gebura's top 2 pages are both extremely strong in my opinion, like our A tier page, Claws of Savagery. This page gives a buff to a single ally that makes it so that when they sustain total damage greater than 25% of their max HP, they become untargetable and unclashable next scene, as well as gaining 2 strength and inflicting 1 bleed next scene on hit. I initially underrated this page since I didn't realize that the trigger accumulated damage rather than being all in one hit, so you're probably going to get 3 triggers at least before dying, and the trigger is very powerful. Like Flower Petals, this page is stronger on low max HP characters, although it's possible to trigger every turn on purple tier using Now Die with at least 2 other offensive dice, but you'll need a lot of healing to recover 28 HP per scene. In any case, this isn't very relevant for the rating, as even just playing standard, it's very powerful. Finally, in S tier, we have Vampirism. This page gives a buff to a single ally that makes them deal 2 to 4 bonus damage and recover 2 to 5 HP on hit against targets with bleed. This is a very simple page, but extremely strong. It's very similar to Malekith's Gluttony, dealing an average of 1 extra damage compared to it when it does trigger, but having a slightly different trigger condition. Enemies having bleed is trivial to trigger, as there are many pages that inflict bleed that you'd want to be playing anyways, with the most relevant one being Gebura's level Slash, as well as Claws of Savagery and Fear of Water, although I think it's better to just adjust your decks to inflict bleed rather than take that page. Moving on to Tier 2, in F tier we have Mountain of Corpses. Like Nyx, this choice might be a bit controversial. This page gives a buff to a single ally that kills all other librarians and gives the selected librarian max light, light restoration, strength, haste, and protection equal to the number of allies killed for the rest of the fight. This is a solo strategy that you have to build around. Since it's a -2, you're going to have to need your other librarians to have bad pages, which is fine since they're going to die anyways, and while the reward of 4 max light, 4 light regen per scene, 4 strength, haste, and 4 protection is very strong, especially the light, it's generally just not going to be stronger than having 5 fully powered librarians, which puts us in the for fun category of F tier. In D tier we have Wine. This page gives a buff to a single ally that makes it so that when they defeat an enemy with bleed, all allies recover 10 HP and the selected librarian gains max blood if they also have Fear of Water. Even though this doesn't really do anything, it doesn't kill 4 of your librarians, so it escapes F tier on that merit alone. If you do have Fear of Water, you get 2 strength bonus as well, which is nice, but getting kills is somewhat uncommon, so it's not a big sell. Our C tier page is Laughter. This page gives a buff to a single ally that makes it so that when they're hit while under 50% HP, there's a 50% chance that all enemies take 2 to 5 stagger damage and get 1 fragile next scene up to 3 times per scene. This page is more consistently relevant than Wine since you'll often have a librarian below 50% HP by the time you're getting tier 2 pages, as well as need to have all your librarians fall below 50% HP to lose. The effect isn't incredible, but it's good enough to get to C tier. I put Roddled Welts in B tier. This page gives a buff to a single librarian that gives them 1 strength every scene if they're below 50% HP, 2 strength if they're below 35%, and 4 strength if they're below 25%. This page has pretty incredible synergy with Eugen's page of course, but aside from that, the page is just solid to good. Again, falling below 50% HP is pretty likely, but 35% and 25% are rare and usually means you build around having your librarian being low. I'd say if you have a librarian at 25% or lower, it's the obvious take, but if you're fairly healthy, then it's not as good as our A tier page, which is Absorption. This page gives a buff to a single ally that makes them recover 20% of their max HP upon defeating an enemy with a max of 20 HP. And, at the start of each scene, they gain strength based on the amount of HP they've recovered during the act at a rate of 1 strength for every 10% HP restored, with a max of 3 strength. This page's effect is incredibly strong, but it doesn't last for a multi-act fight, and unfortunately you lose both parts of the effect. In a long single-act fight, then this is your S tier page, but in multi-wave fights this page is pretty mediocre, and I'd take Roddled Welts over it. It's nice that even if your librarian doesn't get kills, they can still get the strength bonus from other sources like Health Hauler, or one of the many HP recovery Abno pages Gebura has. Our S tier page is Instincts. This page gives a buff to a single ally that makes it so that when they win a clash, the last die on their current page gains 1 to 2 power and they recover 3 to 7 HP when they get a hit with that die. While this isn't the most potent power boost or the most restful recovery, it's extremely consistent and reasonably strong. Gebura's top 3 tier 2 pages are all situationally broken, although Roddled Welts has anti-synergy with Absorption and Instincts, but while those two are situational, you'll never be sad taking Instincts, so it gets the nod over those two. Finally, moving on to tier 3 pages, I put Goodbye in C tier. This page gives a buff to a single ally that doubles the power of the last die they play each scene. This page turbocharges a single die, but most often, your most powerful dice are some of the first ones you play in mass attacks or bomb pages, and your last dice are usually utility pages. Of course, since you choose how to clash, you can just use a mass attack and no other pages, which is a somewhat common occurrence on YouTube clips of Gebura with Goodbye and strength stacking rolling 120 on Great Split Horizontal. While that's funny and reasonably good, it does require some setup to be broken, which isn't so with the other tier 3 pages. Next, I put Hello in A tier. This page gives a buff to a single ally that makes the first die they play recover HP equal to the amount of damage it dealt. This is some incredible HP sustain, again, since your first die is usually one of your strongest ones, being on a bomb page or a mass attack. The downside is that if your first die is a defensive die, then you get no value, but this page can easily fully heal your librarian every scene with mass attacks, so that situation is more palatable as a downside. Finally, I put Shell in S tier. This page gives a buff to a single ally that nullifies stagger damage they receive from attacks. I originally had Shell in A tier and Hello in S tier, and it is quite close, but I think nullifying stagger damage is a bit stronger, especially in the context of the rest of Gebura's floor. There are 4 other pages that recover HP, not including Hello, so you're often more in need of stagger sustain than HP sustain. Notably, this doesn't prevent the stagger damage from failing to meet the damage threshold on Kali's ego, so be careful about that. There isn't much to say about the page, but if you're planning on taking it, there's a heavy consideration for not running Mind Hollow on your intended target, perhaps with Remain Vigilance and Peace, but that's probably not necessary unless you're soloing. Overall, while Gebura has some really bad pages in my opinion, her top tier pages are generally pretty incredible. With the additional consideration of having access to the Red Mist, I have her rated 3rd in my floor rankings. In the next video, we'll be talking about all of Chessed's abnormalities. I'll see you soon, and as always, thank you for watching.